मेदिनि विश्वविनोदिनि नन्दिनुते गिरिवरविन्द्य शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिणि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि गितिसुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. I think it is. So as I mentioned in the comment section, there was some technical difficulty. Now that has been managed. So yes, Utsav manao, Utsav ki taiyari karo. So hello, Dr. Shomode, and thank you for joining our podcast after many months. Thank you, sir.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, the audio is fine. The video is a little laggy, but the
Thanks
audio
for
is
having
fine.
me. Thanks for calling me again.
So, sir, before you give us a brief of what is in the book, this phenomenal book, Being Hindu, I hope you all have bought it. If not, there's a affiliate link in the description box as well. And I just have two questions that I have to ask you in the beginning. One is, what made you write this book? Why is such an interesting topic? Why this topic specifically? And second is, why would an academic start a book by naming and shaming another academic and criticizing him? How did it come to that? Why were you so angry?
All right. Disappearing at my end every now and then. Can you hear me clearly?
Wait, it was gone for a while. I think it's fine now.
Can you hear me? Please confirm.
Sir. Yeah. My voice is reaching you a little late. On? Yeah, go on.
I hope I'm audible at your end that you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the answer to the first question is I've been kind of playing with this idea for a while, or rather I was playing with this idea for a while, that I ought to attempt a book on the Hindu mode of politics because it is generally termed an invention, a nefarious invention by the left liberal group of intellectuals and academics. So I wanted to establish that there is a historical precedent for this mode of politics, that it is not completely an invention, leave aside a nefarious invention. And I also wanted to establish the point, or rather the position, that politics is never independent of culture or cultural mores, cultural frameworks, and so on. As some political scientist put it once, I suppose it is a Mearsheimer, that politics is the downstream of culture. And then there is another medievalist, a historian who I'm very fond of reading. He writes in one of his works, the name is Chris Wickham, that politics has to be moralized. And he sought to demonstrate this position by pointing out how Catholicism, Catholic values, ideas, mores, moralized kingly authority in medieval Europe. So, on the one hand, politics derives from cultural mores, values, frameworks, etc. On the other hand, politics has to be moralized. It has to be legitimated in a moral framework. And in this regard, once again, it refers to cultural values, mores, and frameworks. So, I, as you have seen, attempt to establish in the book that one can determinately identify a Christian mode of politics in medieval Europe. And the seat, or the heart of this Christian mode of politics, so to speak, was the Holy Roman Empire. And then again, in the case of the Islamic world at large, and especially also, not especially, also in medieval India, you can identify an Islamic polity or Islamicate in political practice. Similarly, you can identify a Hindu mode of politics in history. So I wanted to establish this idea, and I wrote this book to that end.
Right.
And as about naming and shaming an academic, a fellow academic, I don't think I've quite done that. I've tried to present a systematic critique of this individual's positions, not policies.
Yeah.
I think I've launched any ad hominem attacks upon this individual. You're referring to Professor Ajin Vinayak, the political scientist who taught at the University of Delhi. So I don't think I have shamed him in that way. I don't think I have any reason to shame him at all. He has his views, academic positions, political views, and he is completely entitled to these views. But the point is that I think these views are somewhat ill-founded or unfounded, and they're also insensitive towards the historical heritage that I'm referring to, which is the Hindu mode of politics. And in his incomprehension of this Hindu mode of politics and his insensitivity towards this mode of politics, he tries to delegitimize it. So I've attempted to present a systematic critique of his ideas and positions.
Okay.
I've met him a couple of times. Not a bad person in any way.
Okay.
But then I have my disagreements with him.
Right. So do we need to rehash this argument again that there was no Hinduism back then during the time of Cholas, and Cholas were not Hindus? Shiva is not a Hindu god. He's some Dravidian Dalit god or something. Those kinds of things.
Well, this is like saying that there was no gravity previous to Isaac Newton. There's a certain set of cultural practices, spiritual values, which we today identify with the human mass, which self-identifies as Hindus today. As about the term Hinduism itself, it is not that old, of course. As far as I know, it was coined by Raja Ram Mohan Roy in the first half of the 19th century, and I pointed this out in this book. But then expressions Hindu, Hinduism, etc. Are conceptual descriptions for, as I said, a set of spiritual values and cultural mores. And as far as these spiritual values and cultural mores are concerned, or cultural practices are concerned, you can, of course, read them pretty far back in history. I think you can read them or read traces of them in the Indus Valley civilization. As far as the feelings of the Indus Valley civilization are concerned, there is evidence that the people inhabiting this civilizational complex, or the Indus Saraswati civilizational complex, as it is called today, revered the fig tree, the people, the bull, etc. So these are cultural significators or spiritual significators which Hindus value even today. So you can read the traces of what we today identify as Hinduism as far back as the Indus Valley or the Indus Saraswati civilization. So this argument that that the set of cultural practices or spiritual values which we today identify as Hinduism and which we today associate with this human mass which self-identifies as Hindus did not exist in the past in early India. In early medieval India is very specious, and I think it is completely disingenuous. It is a falsification of history, outright falsification of history.
Right.
Or if you claim that these practices did exist, or rather these values did exist in these periods that I'm referring to, but these may not be termed Hinduism. Once again, that is a falsification of history. That is a deliberate falsification of history.
Nice. Yeah, your criticisms are getting more and more harsher, which is why I was surprised, especially while reading this book. So, sir, what is the history of this Hindu kingship from the time of Cholas to Narendra Modi?
Where do I begin? This is something that I've not dwelt upon in the book, or rather argued in the book. But my personal position, or rather personal hunch, is that a distinctly dharmic framework, or a self-reflexive, self-aware dharmic framework of Hindu kingship begins to emerge around, let us say, 3rd century BCE or so, with the emergence of the Satavahana ruling dynasty. But this framework of Hindu kingship attains a full maturity, I suppose, in the early medieval period, as it is called in conventional historiography, around the 9th and the 10th centuries. So what is this framework of kingship? To put it very briefly and as simply as I can, here is a social complex. Here is a social formation, which we may term Hindu retrospectively. The social complex, the social formation is divided into these social solidarities, or rather the various jati groups. So this is a kind of a honeycomb organization, cellular organization, as far as the social formation is concerned. As far as each jati group is concerned, once again, there are certain social mores, certain kinds of orthopraxis, which are specific to them. But at the same time, there are some common cultural significators which are important to all these jati groups, regardless of where they're located in the social complex, as far as the ritual status is concerned. The temple, the Brahmin, the cow, etc. So above this social complex, which is organized as a cellular structure, as I said, sits the Raja. Raja oversees the social body and addresses the social body at large by upholding and patronizing these cultural significators, the temple, the Brahmin, the cow, etc. So this is, as far as I understand, the classical form of Hindu kingship, that the Raja is not quite an autocratic authority as far as the social body is concerned. To a considerable extent, the social body is self-governing because, as I've repeatedly emphasized already, it is organized in a cellular fashion. And these jati units, in various regards, are self-governing because they have, let us say, the caste panchayats, they have their own, notables, leaders, etc., who administer the cellular structure and so on. But the Raja administers some jurisprudence, which is, or rather certain juristic principles, which are common to the social body at large. And once again, addresses the social body at large, lands cohesion by being the chief upholder of these sacred signifiers. And as I've already emphasized, let me do so again. This is, in my understanding, the classical form of Hindu kingship. It attains this form, its mature form, in the Chola period, perhaps. Tentative suggestion, because I'm not a medievalist after all, and I can read the classical languages such as Sanskrit, Tamil, etc. My area of specialization is somewhat, is tentatively Bengal, and period specialization is colonial India. So these are very tentative suggestions, once again. Nevertheless, so this is in summary the classical form of Hindu kingship, as far as I understand it. So this, to resort to some jargon, is the corporative Hindu polity. Each jati unit or each cell of the social organization may be termed a corporate group or a cooperative group. There's the Brahmin, there's the Kshatriya, there are the various other varnas, the jati groups, etc. And above this cellular organization, cooperative organization of a society, sits the Raja, who also administers and oversees the social body from a cooperative location. He is the Kshatriya king, munificent, brave Kshatriya king par excellence. So this is the cooperative mode of Hindu political practice. Coming to the colonial period, the Hindu mode of politics, the political practice, yet again can be discerned, but it changes its broader framework, as I've tried to argue in the book. It shifts from the cooperative framework to the framework of a communitas on account of a colonial governmentality. Because the colonial governmentality, compared to the medieval Hindu polities, was very intrusive. The colonial state intruded into the very heart of the cellular organization of Indian society and Hindu society, because the law becomes very intrusive in this case and overrides the customary law, which was specific to the jati groups to begin with. Thus, the colonial state creates a common paradigm of experiences, maybe chiefly in the form of oppression for Hindu society at large. So there is a need for greater solidarity in Hindu society. And at the same time, this greater solidarity, heightened solidarity naturally emerges because the Hindus share a common experience of oppression in this period, in the colonial period. Thus emerges this framework of social and political behavior, which has been termed communitas by a historian. Her name is Andrea Freytag, and I suppose she borrows the term from cultural anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist whose name I cannot recall at this moment. Nevertheless, communitas is an expression that I borrowed immediately from her. She is the immediate source as far as this term is concerned, and its deployment or employment is concerned in my book. I've explained communitas as a formulation of Hindu solidarity, as a formulation of Hindu unity, which overrides the jati identities of the Hindus. or
Okay.
their identities in terms of their geographical provenances, in terms of
Right.
where they come from in the country. So this is
Right.
communitarian. There is
Right.
a heightened sense of solidarity in Hindu society at large due to a shared experience of oppression, primarily, chiefly, maybe, and it in turn generates collective modes of Hindu behavior, Hindu social
Sir, can
leadership.
I interrupt you? I have one very important question here. So you are saying there is something that overrides Jati identity?
There is something in the sense that there is a heightened sense of solidarity in the society in this period, overriding the Jati identities. And there is also a conscious formulation of the solidarity by the Hindu elites, by the Hindu social leaders, Hindu notables, etc. This exercise, this sense has been termed communitas by century of later. And
Right.
of course, organically speaking, there are these cultural significators which override the Jati identities in the sense that
Right.
regardless of what Jati group you come from, you
Hmm.
revere these cultural significators, the cow, the
True.
temple, definitely. Um,
True.
the person of the Brahmin, due to the reason
Right.
that
Right.
Brahmin represents certain cultural ideas or bodily practices,
Yes. Yes.
as C.A. Bailey might term them. He's a Cambridge historian, or rather was a Cambridge historian. He died a few years ago.
Okay.
I'm not going further into the concept of bodily practices, but it suffices
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say that it is certain idea of a purity which is
Hmm.
manifested in the bodily conduct of an individual. Nevertheless,
Yeah. Yeah.
the point is that yes, there is an organic um,
Hmm.
sense in which Hindu identity is expressed as a
Hmm.
solidarity, and it's in the form of this common shared adoration, so to speak, of a certain
Right.
cultural
Right.
significance. The cow, the
Which
Brahmin,
do
the
you
temple.
think? Which do you think was more effective? The common adoration for the Hindu symbols, or the common knowledge of that solidarity based on that? See, we all have faced similar atrocities at the hands of the outgroup.
Well, the two phenomena align in the colonial period. Here are certain cultural
Hmm. Right.
significators which are commonly revered, adored by all Hindus. Then
Hmm.
again, there's a common paradigm of oppression which they're all experiencing
Right.
simultaneously. So, what do the
Hmm.
Hindu elites do? What does the Hindu social leadership do? It leverages these cultural symbols to generate
Yeah.
further self-aware, self-reflexive solidarity in Hindu society at large. So in the
Hmm.
colonial period, you find the Hindu social notables in the Gangetic Belt, mobilizing Hindus around the Devanagari script and the Hindi language, as well as the cow. There's the cow
Hmm.
protection movement on a massive scale
Yeah.
in what is today UP and the
Yes.
state of Bihar, as well as what we term the Hindi Nagari agitation. So the cow, the Hindi
Hmm.
language written in the Devanagari script to become very
Yeah.
significant, in fact, core cultural significators for Hindus at large. And there is a massive mobilization around these cultural significators. They
Hmm.
become the very basis of Hindu identity in the Gangetic
Hmm.
Belt. And this mobilization is consciously carried out by the Hindu elites. And
Yeah.
this the expression, once again, a conscious expression of the phenomenon which has been termed communitas by
Hmm.
centuries later. And the term, as I've told, that borrowed
Yeah.
from her.
So then, is Hindutva this communitas? Savarkar's idea of Hindutva.
Yes, Hindutva as a self-reflexive, deliberate political program is an expression of a communitas.
Hmm.
You see, there is a Hindutva that you can historically identify. What is Hindutva? Hindutva is the political, social, cultural heritage of the people, of the social mass, of the demographic, who self-identify as Hindus. The Chola polity is an aspect of Hindutva. The Vijayanagara polity is an aspect of Hindutva. The
Hmm.
Sena polity in Bengal is an aspect of Hindutva. These are various political expressions of Hindutva that you can identify in the early medieval or medieval periods. And these expressions are a part of the political heritage of the social mass, demographic, which terms itself Hindu. Then again,
Yeah.
the cultural practices, the spiritual values, etc. These are all
Yeah.
aspects of Hindutva. And as far as the spiritual values are concerned, their reified expression, that is a
Hmm.
tangible social expression, is is the paradigm, is the phenomenon that we call Hinduism. So Hinduism in this way
Right.
is an aspect of Hindutva. So here
Right.
is a Hindutva which you as a set of civilizational and historical phenomena. And
Yeah.
then there is again Hindutva, which you can identify as a conscious political program, as a consciously formulated political program.
Right.
And this mode of
Yeah.
Hindutva you may attribute to Savarkar. And in this form,
Right.
Hindutva is very much an expression of communitas. It is the idea that regardless of who you are, what language you speak, what jati group you come from, or part of India you come from, if you're a Hindu, you belong to this enormous social solidarity of
Yeah.
Hindus.
Yeah. Now that social solidarity bypassing or overriding jati identity, how much of it was there, or how much of it was significant to some significant degree in the 800 ADs and 900 ADs? Do you think?
Well, I've already, I think, dwelt upon this issue as far as I understand this period and Hindu social conduct and political conduct in this period. Hindus were organized in the corporative
Yeah.
mode.
Yeah.
Group was a cooperative solidarity and had certain mores, social mores, as well as the cultural practices specific to it. But at the same time, each jati group collectively revered and adored these common significators, some of which are the temple cow and the Brahmin.
Yeah,
So
but that did not.
an incipient form of communitas probably you can identify in this way in the period that you are
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the slip in
Yeah.
grammar.
I'm bringing that up only because then the only question that comes up is, then why weren't the forever question, that why weren't the Hindus united enough to prevent the invasions and stuff? Because if they did not prevent those invasions, it means that the thing that was overriding the jati identities was not that strong enough. There was just an abstract idea about it.
Well, you see, now it depends on what you mean by resisting the invasions. Because Hindus did resist, or Hindu rulers and Hindu
Yeah.
polities did successfully resist the invasions from the northwest
Hmm.
for a considerable period of time. The first Arab invasion of Sindh was successfully carried out in the 8th century CE. But the Arabs retreated in a couple of generations, I suppose, if I know correctly, from Sindh, since I'm not a specialist authority on this period. Thereafter, for the next 300 odd years, invasions from the northwest were repeatedly repulsed and successfully repulsed by Hindu rulers. So Hindus did succeed in repulsing the invasions for a considerable period of time. If you compare
Right.
the fate of India to that of Persia or other parts of the world, Egypt, etc., India has been very successful in repulsing these invasions. Now, later in the 11th century CE, finally, the Turks, the Afghans succeed in finding their way into the heart, the interior of the Indian civilizational space. Now, this is very likely due to the reason that Indian feudalism, or rather the social, economic, political phenomenon that is termed Indian feudalism, had attained considerable maturity by that time. So political authority, or rather topmost political authority, was quite feeble at this point in Indian history, because the political structure at large had feudalized. Below the Raja, there were scores and scores of Samantas. And the Raja had probably a small personal bodyguard of his own, and not a standing army, not anymore in this period, at this point in Indian history. So when Samanta would contribute a posse of soldiers to the Raja's army, to the Raja's force. And this complicated matters as far as the mobilization, mastering of the army was concerned, and having a common strategic command over the army was concerned. So very likely it is due to these reasons that finally first the Afghans and the Turks find their way into the heart of the Indian civilizational space. And referring to a Marxist historian, or the first Marxist historian proper in India, D.D. Kosambi, he was a mathematician by training. He has a very interesting theory about why India failed to repulse the invasions in this period. And interestingly,
Okay.
If you are to go by him, it was actually due to the prosperity uh,
Hmm.
of Indian agriculture in this period.
Hmm.
So Kosambi
Yeah.
writes in an introduction to the study of Indian history, if I remember the title of the book verbatim, that the Indian agrarian economy was very successful by this period, by this point in time, and the arable, as they call it, expanded considerably. And the arable is cultivable land.
Hmm.
With the expansion of the arable, villages had multiplied. And the
Hmm.
Raja in a territorial state, in a polity, would deploy a small body of a small posse of soldiers in each village, so that the extraction of revenue from that village is smoothly carried out to assist the
Yeah.
revenue um, agents. And
Hmm.
this body of soldiers, this armed Jose would comprise a couple of elephants, 20 to 25 foot soldiers, and so on.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this diffused the state across the territory as far as Titi Kosambi is concerned. And since the military power of the state was diffused in such a manner across the territory, the state at large was militarily weakened when it suddenly faced an invasion, because its military power would have to be mastered across the territory, and that would um, take some time. So this is
Hello.
Kosambi's
Wait, sir. Your voice is breaking up a
explanation,
little.
or rather
Uh,
economically reductive, typically Marxist statements. Only at a, can you hear me
uh,
now?
it's cracking up a little. Can you repeat the last bit again from the diffusing the state part?
Expansion of the arable villages multiplied, and to extract revenue from each village, the state would deploy a certain number of soldiers in each village. Also, a couple of elephants, and so on. So this diffused the military authority of the state across the territory. And
Hmm.
when there would be an invasion, the state would have to actually painstakingly muster all its soldiers across its territory again. And this would be a time consuming process. So, this is why, according to T.T. Kosambi, India failed to repulse the invasions in this period. And
Hmm.
as you can see, this is an economically reductive Marxist position, but still very
Hmm.
interesting, nevertheless. And
Hmm.
if one
Right.
were to go by him, it is due to the success and prosperity of India's agrarian economy that the country failed to repulse the invaders, as far
Hmm.
as the 10th and the 11th centuries are concerned. And once again, as
Right.
I've said, some of this probably was also due to the mature um, feudalization of the Indian
Hmm.
political structure,
Right. Okay, sir.
advanced
I have
feudalization.
right. Right. I have some other questions. We'll get to that after you explain what all were your findings and observations while writing the book. So, you had discussed up till colonial period.
Yeah, to the post
Wait, your audio was gone
independent
again.
period.
Yeah. Now it's fine, I think. Yeah, sir. Start.
So, in the colonial period, Hindu politics and Hindu political work all together, which is the framework of communitas. And
Hmm.
communitas is the idea that Hindus form a solidarity, regardless of their jati identities, linguistic
Hmm.
identities, or the part of the country, part of India they might come from.
Hmm.
And this idea is carried forward, or rather given greater maturity by the organizational expressions of communitas, as we might term them, um, the Hindu Mahasabha, the RSS, and so on. And in the
Hmm.
post-independent period, the idea is inherited by Bharatiya Janasangh, and Bharatiya Janasangh works on this idea, tries to foster it through its various social activities. It mobilizes, organizes Hindu society around certain objectives, ideas, etc., which, let us say, as we can identify them at this point, um, car protection, protection and
Hmm.
promotion of the Hindi language, and so on. And of course, the preservation of the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the country, etc.
Yeah.
And eventually, these initiatives are inherited by the Bharatiya Janasangh's ontological successor, as we may call it, the
Hmm.
Bharatiya Janasangh.
Hmm.
However, what is distinctive about the Hindu mode of politics even though it is based on communitas, is that uh, it is not about aggressively othering non-Hindus. It is actually quite accepting of non-Hindus, their identities, etc., as long
Yeah.
as they identify themselves with this country and its civilizational past and
Yeah.
heritage.
Hmm.
So it is not about an aggressive demonization of non-Hindus,
Yeah.
as left liberals say often.
Yeah.
In fact, generally.
Yeah. Sir, how has Narendra Modi harmonized history? Because your chapter name is very fascinating here. Harmonizing history, Narendra Modi.
Um, well, once again, see traces of probably in a classical Hindu kingship in his
Hmm.
in his conduct as a political leader. Just give me one moment. Let
Yeah.
me take a sip of water.
Yeah. One of our viewers is saying, Sir's speaking style is really cool.
Really, thank you much. Sometimes people find it hard to follow me, as they say, and as they say, that is because I speak too fast. I've had this problem always, actually. Nevertheless, so as
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
saying, maybe you can find traces to conduct as a political leader and the chief executive of the country. Take, for instance, how he has refurbished certain very important, very significant Hindu pilgrimages, sacred sites, shrines,
Hmm.
etc. So what
Right.
happens as a result of this is that the focus of Hindu society at large and the part of the body politic portion of the citizenry which calls itself a Hindu in this country is directed towards these sacred sites, these shrines, etc. There's a
Hmm.
general more Hindu mobilization, not a physical mobilization in this case,
Hmm.
but a mobilization of Hindu consciousness, awareness around these sacred sites and shrines. So as a result of
Right.
this, there is a generation of a greater solidarity amongst Hindus, amongst the citizens who call themselves Hindu in this case. So it
Right.
overrides the fault and fractures in Hindu society, in Hindu citizenry, and it again generates a community among Hindus. And this probably at the end of the day, good for the country, because if the body politic, if the citizen, it is a good thing for the country at large. It means that there is a greater cohesion um, of citizens behind the Indian state. It lends a greater um, weight to the Indian state, perhaps, and makes it more efficient, perhaps, in its various endeavors.
Right.
So this is one way in which maybe you could say that Narendra Modi is harmonizing history and the present. And this
Hmm.
very likely is not a endeavor on his part, but let me repeat what I just said in simple, straightforward words. There are traces of uh, classical Hindu kingship in his leadership, perhaps. And
Hmm.
this is one way in which he is harmonizing history in the present. And another way in which, again, he is doing so is by addressing the social body at large.
Hmm.
In certain ways, he addresses Hindus when he is refurbishing shrines and the pilgrimages. But in certain other
Hmm.
ways, he addresses all of Indian citizens through
Hmm.
his welfare initiatives. And
Hmm.
this is again very redolent of a classical Hindu kingship.
Hmm.
So another way, perhaps, in which he is harmonizing history and the present.
Yeah. Sir, where does Atal Bihari Vajpayee fit into this? How much would you rate him? Let's say, is he does he also have traces of Hindu kingship in his functioning?
Well, back in the day, I was a teenager when he was the prime minister of the country, and the
Hmm.
English language press would say that he is a borderline liberal.
Hmm.
So
Right.
um, he did address the social body at large. He was a remarkable leader, and
Hmm.
I would say that there are ontological continuities between his leadership and Narendra Modi's leadership. It is a framework of functioning as a leader
Hmm.
to which Narendra Modi has lend greater elaboration and greater maturity. So this is a mode of functioning which Modi has probably derived from Vajpayee, because Vajpayee's prime ministership too was very welfare oriented, and he turned around the country in certain ways. That is when the
Right.
highways
Yeah.
started to be built on a large scale. That is when
Yes.
internet connectivity began to expand in India. Cell phones
Yeah.
first started to get commonplace in this
Yeah.
country around 2002-3. Prior to that, this gadget was a toy of the rich. I acquired
Yes.
my first cell phone in 2004. I think that is when they first became affordable to the Indian middle class.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, leaving all this aside, the minutiae aside, the basic point that I'm trying to make is that Vajpayee addressed the social body at large through his welfare initiatives. And
Hmm.
Modi too does that. Narendra Modi too does that. And in this way, there is an ontological continuity between the prime ministerships of these two leaders.
Hmm.
Both are very welfare oriented. Vajpayee was very welfare
Yeah.
oriented. So is Narendra
Yes.
Modi. And the welfare
Yeah.
initiatives are directed at Indian citizenry at large, regardless of who they might be or what their
Yeah.
creeds might be. So
Yeah.
this is how.
Sir, how is this then? I mean, it's kind of obvious to everyone, but if you could just articulate it as an academic, how is this system of this idea of Hindu kingship different from the way Congress wanted to run the country or did run the country? And what is this Congress system?
Um, all right. By the Congress system, we mean this seemingly uncontestable hegemony of the Congress party,
Hmm.
that it seemed to enjoy post-independent, that it
Hmm.
appeared that the Congress cannot be dislodged from power altogether.
Hmm.
Um, Rajni Kothari, who was a political scientist, argues that the Congress system came in place in India, in post-independent India, because the Congress had led the freedom movement prior to
Hmm.
1947. So it was the natural choice for Indian voters at large. This is one
Hmm.
argument that he makes. But
Hmm.
other assessments of the Congress system have been made, and these are less charitable assessments. One idea was that argument that has been advanced uh, is that mm, the bureaucracy was complicit with the Congress. So
Hmm.
probably it is being insinuated in this case that the elections probably were not completely free and fair in post-independent
Right.
India, that they were tweaked, manipulated in certain ways that the Congress enjoyed advantages. Then again, being in power gave this political party, gave the Congress party control over resource dispersal, and it could buy voters over, so to speak, by
Hmm.
dispersing resources in this or that way. So
Hmm.
these are certain ways in which the Congress system came into place and remained in place in a hegemonic way for nearly 2 decades after independence. In fact, precisely 2 decades after independence. The first chinks in the Congress system appeared in 1967 when the Congress's majority in the Lok Sabha was greatly reduced and the Congress lost
Hmm.
power in a number of states.
Yeah.
Now, what distinguished the Congress system from classical Hindu kingship was that the Congress, deliberately taxonomized Indian society. The Congress's welfare initiatives were not directed at the citizenry at large, at the
I
micro
see.
level at least. I'm not a development economist, and these are not
Hmm.
informed views by any means. These are layperson's views. But anyway, the
Okay.
point is that, or rather, the impression that I have is that the
Hmm.
Congress taxonomized Indian society, directed welfare initiatives piecemeal towards the
Hmm.
citizenry. That
Hmm.
here is a welfare initiative which is for social group A. Here is another welfare
Right.
initiative
Right.
which is for social group B. So it
Hmm.
played off segments of Indian society and Hindu society against each other. It deliberately
Right.
fractured Hindu society. And of course, the Congress ignored the civilizational heritage of the country to a great extent and
Right.
formulated a constitutional and developmental nationalism. Interestingly, this is an
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
that I've recently come across.
Yeah.
So it advanced the idea that the Indian state, the Indian Republic, is not a civilizational entity. It is not the inheritor to a
Yeah.
civilizational heritage. That it is a
Hmm.
constitutional legal
Right.
creation, and it
Yeah.
focused in patriotism through, or rather, rooted Indian patriotism through constitutionalism and the
Yeah.
legality enshrined in constitutionalism. And again, in Nehruvian developmental initiatives try to mobilize a nationalism around around these symbols
Yeah.
of a development, so to speak,
Yeah.
the dam, the power
Yeah.
plant, nuclear
Yeah.
power plant, and so
IITs,
on.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah, IITs, IIMs, and so on.
Mm.
So here is a very curious, breed of nationalism which the Congress sought to advance under
Mm.
its rule: a constitutionalist and developmental nationalism, ignoring
Right.
India's cultural, civilizational heritage.
Mm.
So here is what is distinctive about the Congress system. Once again,
Right.
to recapitulate in simple language, um, the Congress system taxonomized Indian society, Hindu society.
Mm.
It broke it up. It played off one segment, one section against another, and it also tried to formulate a very curious sort of nationalism, which
Mm.
offhand may be termed, constitutionalist developmental nationalism.
Right. Sir, I know now at this point you are not being a harsh critic of anything. You are simply giving observations. But I now want you to make a sort of a qualitative description here. Were they wrong for doing those things, and or bad for doing those things, or was it just another way of doing things? And if they were in fact wrong or bad for doing those things, were they bad for doing that sort of piecemeal welfareism, or were they wrong for ignoring India's ancient civilization and heritage completely?
Well, good, bad, wrong, right are terms, expressions which we are supposed to avoid as a professional academics, because these are too
Right.
sentimental A, emotional A,
Yeah.
and too subjective B.
Right.
But yes, I would say that this mode of functioning on the part of the Congress Party did damage to India as a social fabric in certain ways. It fractured into
Right.
Indian society, Hindu society, definitely. It also
Hmm.
cut off an entire generation of Indians from their
Exactly.
civilizational cultural moorings. So
Yes.
these are ways in which the Congress's mode of functioning was damaging to Indian society. The Congress also indulged the leadership of a certain social segment, which was probably responsible, or whose predecessors were probably responsible for the partition of the country. So
Hmm.
another way in which the Congress's mode of functioning was damaging to the country, as I would say.
Right. Sir, just to play Congress's advocate right now, their argument in this case would be that it was not, in fact, damaging because why must the ancient civilization be saved? Just because it was our ancestors, or was it inherently or objectively a good civilization that needs to be saved? And their second argument would probably be that so what if we completely forget everything about our roots, because that's what happened to all of Europe, etc., also, or South America, entire North America, etc. It's not like any of those past pre-Christian societies remain, or pre-Christian sensibilities, symbols remain. So what if that happened to India as well? Isn't the like Bengali communists say, "Loraita to bhater." So isn't the main fight only about food and food on the table and poverty alleviation, not about what your roots are, no matter what god you worship to?
From a purely aesthetic point of view, I suppose, leaving aside everything else, what you have in terms of a civilizational heritage is worth keeping,
Hmm.
because this is what connects you to your past, and a certain connection to the past is very important for any body politic, any society, any uh,
Hmm.
citizenry,
Right.
because it grounds you in a certain way. If you imagine for a
Right.
moment that here you are in this moment, and you do not have a past,
Hmm.
that would kind of unhinge you psychologically. Just try
Hmm.
to plant this imagination in your head. It is very disturbing, actually.
Yes.
And what happens if a society is completely cut off from its past, from its sense of heritage, and a sense of propriety as per that heritage is very visible in the West today. What is happening in the West is a large scale social decay, because the current generation, Gen Z probably you call it,
Hmm.
is completely detached from its heritage, from its history, from its past. So what
Hmm.
happens as a result of that, as a result of this, is that human mass completely loses a sense of propriety. You
Right.
see, a sense of what is right, wrong, morally, or culturally is to a considerable extent based on our heritage, a sense
Hmm.
of culture as per that heritage.
Hmm.
And when we lose a sense of heritage, when we lose our connection to heritage altogether, we lose the sense of propriety altogether. So what happens as a result of this is that we become all about our bodily appetites. We lose our morality to a considerable extent, and we just pursue our bodily appetites. And what happens consequently, once again, is that the social body, the social mass, cannot be mobilized at large towards this or that objective, even if it is a purely developmental objective. How do you lend cohesion to the social body if it doesn't believe in anything at all collectively? Certain collective values, collective mores are essential for the social body to have the sense of being in it together, to resort to some colloquialism here. Even if you were to direct, orient the social body towards a developmental goal, this social body must have a sense of cohesion, solidarity. And this sense of cohesion, solidarity comes when it has a sense of history, heritage, and a sense of propriety, right, wrong, morality, based on this history, heritage. So this is a rather subjective position, subjective point of view that I'm advancing here. Here is what I would say, though, in response to the question that you raised. This is why we need to preserve our history, heritage. Because you see, if the state is just seen, understood by the citizenry as a mass of property owners, as a club of property owners and taxpayers, the state loses all sanctity, because you could just go and join another club of property owners and taxpayers in the state that you belong to, whose citizen you are, need not be preserved. If it goes to seed, if it disintegrates, let it be so. How does it matter to you? You could just defect from this state and go over to another, to the United States, to the United Kingdom, etc. And if this sense that the state is merely a club of sorts of taxpayers and property owners, it disseminates at large amongst the citizenry, it undermines the foundations of the state. Then why at all should the citizenry rally in defense of the state? If it requires to do so, it would just defect and go over to another state. So at a deeply personal and subjective level, this is what my response to your question is. Here is why we need to preserve our history, heritage, and our connection to history and heritage. Otherwise, the situation that we might face would be very similar to what is happening, what is unfolding in the West today in Western Europe and North America. People wake up on the right or the left side of the bed in the morning, and they imagine that they are this or that gender. Yesterday an individual might identify as male, and today the same individual identifies as a female, and the third day, tomorrow, this individual says that I'm neither, I'm gender fluid. And this is because, a sense of propriety, old-fashioned propriety, based on inherited morality, has completely disappeared. When I was a kid, it would be a very kind of improper thing for a man to put on women's clothing and just arbitrarily, subjectively identify as a woman. But there are individuals doing this today. I'm not judging them. I'm sure they might have their reasons to do that. But I'm only saying that back in the day, 30 years ago, when I was a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, this would be considered a very improper thing for a man to do. And of course, this behavior has its own dangers from a purely legal point of view, as far as women's safety is concerned. Look at what happened in the Olympics. This year, here is an individual, an Algerian individual who I suppose identified as a male.
Identified as a female.
Identified as a female, sorry. Thanks for correcting me. And won a gold medal in women's boxing. Physically abusing women boxers. I say physical abuse because the kind of brutalization that he subjected his adversaries to may only be termed physical abuse. And what if some woman boxer had ended up dead in the ring? Because boxing is a contact sport, and in a contact sport, death is not completely unlikely. There have
Yeah.
been incidents of boxers dying in the ring previously.
Yeah.
So this is very risky as far as I see, that that an individual simply outright arbitrarily identifies as a woman, takes part in women's sport, and if it be a contact sport, might end up inflicting very severe physical damage on
Yeah.
his adversaries. Now, what
Yeah.
if an individual puts on women's clothing, walks into a woman's washroom, identifying as a
Yeah.
woman, and commits a sexual assault? So,
Yeah.
such kind of behavior, from a purely legal point of view, and from the point of view of women's safety, has some very serious problems.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I'm not indicating, insinuating that every individual who, let's say, identifies as a woman, being a biological male, might do something of this sort. But
Yeah.
these are always distinct possibilities,
Hmm. Yeah.
or at least such occurrences are likely.
Yeah. Now, sir, I know you don't like to get into areas which are not your expertise, but the way you, let's say, justified why ancient civilizations or your ancestor civilizations must be preserved. It reminds me of Thomas Aquinas, basically, because that was the debate in Christianity as well. That
I see.
are those pagans knowledgeable at all? Did Plato and Aristotle know anything at all? Thomas Aquinas finally convinces Christians that yes, it's okay to respect them as well, even though they were not Christians. And that's when I guess, therefore, the prosperity of Christian nations begin after Thomas Aquinas does that.
Yeah, Christianity kind of, so to speak, beefed itself up by
Hmm.
incorporating pagan philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aristotle, for example. So this
Yeah.
was a very clever move on the part of Aquinas,
Hmm.
because as a result of this, a lot of very sophisticated pagan ideas, Aristotelian ideas,
Yeah.
to begin with, found their way into Christianity, and
Yeah.
the creed gained greater theological intellectual sophistication as a result.
Yes. Yeah. So, sir, we have an audience question here. He's asking,
And
why does yeah, yeah, go on.
yeah, go on, please. I was just saying that we'll have to wind up now in the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
It's about to be
Uh,
7:30. This was meant to
yeah.
be
Yeah.
a 1 hour
Yeah.
program.
Why is the left wing always ahead in the narrative game and ecosystem building? Even Western right wing is much better compared to pro Hindutva forces.
Well, if I were to answer this question honestly, elaborately, I would say that there are lots of problems in what we term the Indic side or the Indian right wing.
Hmm.
I do not want to go into that area, but to answer the first half of the question as to why the left is more efficient in narrative building, it is because, formal media, for example, formal publishing, is still by and large dominated by the left liberals.
Hmm.
And they, of course, promote their own people. And the old leftist network, as a result of this, is quite intact. The journals are very much, the academic journals are still very much in the hands of the old leftists. Those who review academic papers are still the old leftist or left liberal lot.
Yeah.
So they have a leverage in formal academia, in publishing, and as a result of this, they're better at advancing their own positions, points of view
Hmm.
in these civil society spaces. And as
Hmm.
far as the Indian right wing is concerned, or the Indic side, the Indian non-left is concerned, it has its own
Hmm.
issues. Too much individualistic behavior,
Hmm.
a certain amount of selfishness, certain
Hmm.
insecurities,
Yeah.
due to which it undermines itself. It is a self-undermining, self-sabotaging side. I'll
Okay.
stop here. I don't want to go on as far as this matter is concerned.
Okay, sir. Then last question for today is that this idea of nation states that we have today, would you agree that that's inherently a Christian sort of an idea, and therefore, what does dharmic rule or dharmic kingship even look like in this situation? Of course, you are giving Narendra Modi a bit of credit for that already. Can it become more dharmic, and if so, in what ways? What would that dharmic state entail?
These are important questions, and these are also very sophisticated questions that you've raised. Now, I'm not sure how the nation state might be a Christian idea, because as far as I understand, the 19th century European nationalism, it is a derivative of romanticism, actually. It is a kind of a political romanticism, and I'm not sure how this could be linked to Christianity.
Okay.
It is a kind of valorization of the vogue, as the Germans call it. The jati would be the immediate correlating term in the Bengali language. So the nation state is a kind of irrational valorization of the vogue, and or even apotheosization of the vogue. And as far as I understand, this idea derives from political romanticism. You see, if you are familiar with romanticism as an aesthetic trend, as a literary trend, for example, it was kind of opposed to Enlightenment rationality. Romanticism tried to delve into the most primitive, primeval, and spontaneous aspects of the human personality, human mind. It was into the sublime in nature, and the sublime was what the Romanticists perceive as overwhelming, the great storm, the thunderstorm, the foaming sea. The Romanticists were obsessed with these motives, and these motives were sublime from their point of view. And these were sublime because they triggered the subliminal part of the human psyche. They triggered extreme fear, extreme exuberance in human beings. So the Romanticists were, kind of obsessed with these primeval, primitive emotions: extreme sorrow, extreme fear, spontaneous sorrow, fear, love, affection, etc. They were into spontaneous expressions of the human spirit, the human self. And at the same time, the Romanticists looked for what is timeless, primeval, spontaneous in the vogue, in the jati, in the national group, and valorized it. Here is the reason why, or rather, this is the reason why in 19th century Europe you have these folklorists. For example, the brothers Grimm recording folklore. You have Hans Christian Andersen recording and documenting Scandinavian folklore. And this is all a part of the Romanticist trend. And here is how nationalism emerges in Europe. And the idea of the nation state emerges in Europe. That here is a vogue, here is a nation which is timeless, and the nation is entitled to a state which is its own. This is the idea of the nation state. And the idea is further boosted by the presence of these confining multinational, multilingual empire states, imperial states. The Habsburg Empire, for example, the Tsarist Empire, which were considered prison houses of nationalities by the romantic nationalists of the 19th century Europe. Anyway, so to conclude my response to the first half of the question, I do not think that the nation-state idea is linked to Christianity as such. It is more linked to political romanticism. And what was the other question that you raised?
What does a dharmic state look like?
Yeah, this is a question that I'm personally, kind of dwelling upon for a very long time. What would a dharmic state look like? How would a dharmic state function? To begin with, I suppose, it would uphold certain core significators as far as India's cultural heritage is concerned. It would uphold the Indian notion of the sacred. And
hello? Wait, your audio was gone for a while. Could you repeat a little?
So as I said, I suppose to begin with, a dharmic Indian state ought to kind of respect and incorporate the Indian notions of the sacred. It would moralize its political authority, its authority that it applies upon the social body, resorting to mores, values which are intrinsically civilizationally Indian. And thirdly, the Indian dharmic state address the Indian social body at large in a framework that may be termed dharmic. I know that these responses are sounding very vague, and that is because I'm personally kind of figuring out my response to the question.
Right.
I've been trying to do so for a very long time now, but thank you for raising it nevertheless, because it serves as a reminder to me that I ought to work harder as far as figuring out a response is concerned.
Yeah, we are all in the middle of figuring these questions out these days. Okay then, sir. Thank you for joining the live stream. And guys, this is the book. Go to Amazon. Go to the link in the description box. Adivan is asking, Dada, what's his next book and when is it coming?
It is something about the Banaras Hindu University. It is in production currently.
Okay.
Hopefully, it should be out soon.
Okay. Okay. Okay then.
And meanwhile, I'm writing another book.
Oh, another book.
Yeah.
How? What book is that?
Well, we shall talk about it some other day.
Okay.
It is in the works, and I do not talk about books that are currently in the works.
Okay.
Much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Because they are being written, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for joining us, guys. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting.
Thank you, sir.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाम्बरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां युक्तकेशिं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी